I never thought I would be the kind of person to get into a war with a homeowners association. But when you find HOA board members ripping out your irrigation system on a Tuesday morning while you are trying to work from home, you tend to get a little territorial about your property rights. My name is Peter Zimmerman, and I bought my ranch-style property in Cottonwood Springs, Arizona 3 years ago, specifically because it sat on prime agricultural land with excellent water access. The previous owner, an elderly farmer named Harold, had warned me about the HOA before he sold me the place. "They are trying to turn this whole area into some kind of suburban paradise," he had said, shaking his head. "But this land has been farming country for 100 years. Do not let them push you around." I had nodded politely at the time, thinking he was just being dramatic. I was very wrong. The Cottonwood Springs HOA had formed about 5 years before I moved in, when developers started buying up old ranch land and building cookie-cutter subdivisions around the area. My property was one of the last holdouts, a 12-acre parcel that included the original farmhouse, several outbuildings, and most importantly, a sophisticated irrigation system that Harold had spent decades perfecting. The system drew from an underground aquifer that his family had owned the rights to since 1891, rights that transferred to me when I bought the property. What I did not know until much later was that the same aquifer also supplied water to the entire Cottonwood Springs development. When the developers built the subdivision, they had purchased water access rights from Harold's neighbors, assuming they could tap into the same water source. Harold had refused to sell, and apparently the HOA had been waiting for an opportunity to get their hands on those rights ever since. That opportunity seemed to present itself when I left for a week-long business trip to Denver. I had told my neighbor Marcus to keep an eye on the place, but I had not expected to need surveillance. When I returned home on that Tuesday afternoon, I found complete chaos. My entire drip irrigation system had been torn out. The main water lines were cut. The control panel had been ripped from the wall of my equipment shed, and standing in the middle of my property, directing a crew of workers like she was Napoleon conquering Europe, was Sharon Pritchard, the president of the Cottonwood Springs HOA. Sharon was exactly what you would imagine when you picture an overzealous HOA president. She was in her early 50s, with an aggressively styled blonde bob, designer athleisure wear that probably cost more than my truck payment, and the kind of self-righteous expression that made you want to check if you had accidentally committed a felony just by existing. When she saw me pulling into my driveway, she actually smiled. "Mr. Zimmerman," she called out, walking toward me with a clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "We have been trying to reach you all week." I got out of my truck slowly, trying to process the destruction around me. "What the hell's going on here? Why is there an excavator on my property?" "We are correcting a long-standing violation of HOA regulations," Sharon said, her voice dripping with false patience. "Your irrigation system was not approved by the Architectural Review Committee, and your excessive water usage has been causing issues for the entire community." I stared at her. "My property is not part of your HOA. I have the paperwork to prove it." Sharon's smile tightened. "Actually, a review of the county records shows that your property was included in the HOA boundaries when Cottonwood Springs was incorporated. The previous owner never paid dues, which is why we are having to take corrective action now." "Corrective action?" I looked at the destroyed irrigation lines, the muddy trenches crisscrossing my land. "You are trespassing and destroying my property. Get off my land right now, or I'm calling the police." "We have every legal right to be here," Sharon said, pulling a document from her clipboard. "The HOA board voted last month to claim the water rights for this property due to unpaid dues and violations. We have also arranged to sell those rights to the Cottonwood Springs Utility District for $1.2 million, which will fund several important community improvements." I felt my jaw drop. "You did what?" "The sale closes next week," Sharon continued, clearly enjoying herself now. "The utility district needs to expand water access to support the new construction in Phase 3 of our development. Your aquifer rights will be transferred, and you will be connected to the community well system like everyone else." "Really?" "Mr. Zimmerman, you should be thanking us. Your property value will increase significantly once you are in compliance with community standards." I pulled out my phone. "I'm calling the police right now." Sharon's expression did not change. "Go ahead. We have all the proper permits and documentation. Sheriff Rodriguez is actually a resident of Cottonwood Springs. I am sure he will understand the situation." She was not bluffing. When Deputy Chen arrived 20 minutes later, Sharon presented him with a thick folder of documents, including what appeared to be a lien against my property for $47,000 in back HOA dues, fines for various violations I had never been notified about, and a court order authorizing the HOA to take necessary remedial action to bring my property into compliance. The court order had been issued by Judge Morrison, who, I learned later, also lived in Cottonwood Springs. Deputy Chen looked uncomfortable as he reviewed the paperwork. "Mr. Zimmerman, I'm not a lawyer, but this looks official. You might want to get legal counsel before this goes any further." "They tore out my irrigation system," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "How is that legal?" "The court order gives them authority to remove unpermitted structures," Deputy Chen said. "I am sorry, but unless you can show me documentation that contradicts this, I cannot ask them to leave." I spent the rest of that day in a fury, calling every lawyer in the Phoenix metro area who would take my call. Most of them listened politely and then quoted me retainer fees that would require me to take out a second mortgage. The ones who specialized in HOA law were even more discouraging. "These cases can drag on for years," one attorney told me, "and if they have a court order, you are already behind. The best option might be to negotiate a settlement." I was not interested in settling. I was interested in understanding how Sharon and her HOA board had managed to manufacture legal authority to destroy my property and steal my water rights. So I did what any reasonable person would do in 2024. I started digging through public records online. What I found was worse than I had imagined. The Cottonwood Springs HOA had been systematically targeting properties on the edges of their development, using aggressive legal tactics to force holdouts into compliance or buy them out at below-market prices. 3 other property owners had sold out in the past 2 years after being hit with massive fines and legal fees. One had declared bankruptcy. The HOA's law firm, Peterson and Associates, specialized in exactly this kind of aggressive enforcement action. But Sharon had made one critical error in her research. My property was not subject to HOA jurisdiction because it had been explicitly excluded from the original development plat in 1998. Harold's father had negotiated that exclusion with the original developers, and the documentation was filed with the county recorder's office. The problem was that someone had apparently filed a falsified amended plat in 2019 that removed that exclusion. The filing had been notarized by a Jennifer Harmon, who was listed in the HOA minutes as the secretary of the Architectural Review Committee. I took screenshots of everything, printed copies, and then went back through Harold's old papers that had been stored in my attic. He had kept meticulous records, including the original 1998 agreement with the developers, correspondence with the county, and most importantly, the deed to the water rights that had been in his family since the 1890s. Those water rights were not just for irrigation. They represented ownership of a significant portion of the aquifer itself, including mineral and water extraction rights for the entire underground formation. When Harold's great-grandfather had homesteaded the land in 1891, he had filed a claim under territorial law that gave him rights to the underground water source. That claim had been upheld by Arizona courts in 1923, 1947, and 1968. The aquifer extended beneath approximately 400 acres, including all of Cottonwood Springs and 2 adjacent developments. Harold had sold surface access rights to neighbors over the years for irrigation purposes, but he had never sold the underlying ownership of the aquifer itself, which meant that I, as Harold's successor in interest, owned the water source that Sharon's entire community depended on. I sat in my attic office until 3 in the morning, reading through Arizona water law and making notes. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. It was not a nice plan, but then again, Sharon had not been very nice when she tore up my property. The next morning, I drove to the office of Thomas Whitmore, a water rights attorney in Scottsdale who had handled several high-profile cases involving agricultural water claims. His retainer was not cheap, but when I explained the situation and showed him Harold's documentation, his eyes lit up like I had just handed him a winning lottery ticket. "This is extraordinary," Thomas said, spreading the old documents across his conference table. "Do you understand what you have here? This is a pre-statehood water claim with continuous documented use for over 130 years. It is essentially bulletproof under Arizona law." "Can the HOA really sell my rights to the utility district?" I asked. Thomas shook his head. "Not if they never had the authority to claim them in the first place. And from what you are showing me, they did not. The amended plat that brought your property into the HOA appears to be fraudulent. We will need to verify the signatures and the filing process, but if it is as fake as I think it is, the people who filed it committed forgery and fraud. So what do we do?" Thomas leaned back in his chair. "First, we file an emergency motion to stop the water rights sale. Second, we file a complaint with the county attorney about the falsified plat. Third, we file a civil suit against the HOA for trespass, property damage, and theft. And fourth, we send a very strongly worded letter to every property owner in Cottonwood Springs, informing them that their water access is dependent on your goodwill, and that goodwill is currently in very short supply." I thought about Sharon's smug expression as she directed her crew to destroy my irrigation system. "Let's do all of that." We filed the emergency motion the next day. The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday in Maricopa County Superior Court, which gave us less than a week to prepare. Thomas worked fast, pulling together evidence, filing briefs, and deposing the county recorder's staff about the suspicious plat amendment. What we discovered was that Jennifer Harmon, the HOA secretary who had notarized the amended plat, had moved to Florida in 2020 and denied any knowledge of the document when Thomas tracked her down by phone. "I signed some HOA paperwork while I was on the board, but I never notarized anything," she said. "I'm not even a notary public." That was enough for Thomas to file a criminal complaint with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. While we waited for the hearing, Sharon and the HOA board continued to act like they owned my property. They installed a chain-link fence around the perimeter where my irrigation system had been, posted signs declaring it an HOA utility easement, and sent me a bill for $3,200 for the cost of the fence installation. I ignored the bill. I was busy with other things, specifically researching Arizona water law and the rights of aquifer owners. What I learned was that under Arizona's groundwater management code, the owner of a water source has broad authority to control access, set usage limits, and charge fees for extraction rights. If I could prove my ownership of the aquifer, I could theoretically cut off water access to the entire Cottonwood Springs development. I was not quite ready to go nuclear, but it was nice to know the option existed. The hearing on Monday morning was held in Judge Patricia Walton's courtroom. Judge Walton had a reputation for being no-nonsense and deeply unimpressed by HOA shenanigans, which Thomas considered a good sign. Sharon showed up with 3 lawyers from Peterson and Associates, all of them carrying banker's boxes full of documents. She sat in the front row of the gallery looking confident and composed, like this was just another routine matter. Thomas presented our case methodically. He showed the original 1998 plat with the exclusion for my property. He showed the 1891 water rights claim and the subsequent court decisions upholding it. He showed the fraudulent 2019 amended plat and Jennifer Harmon's sworn statement denying that she had filed it. And then, for good measure, he showed photos of the destruction the HOA had caused to my property. The HOA's lead attorney, a man named Brian Fletcher, who had the slick, overconfident manner of someone who was used to winning through intimidation, tried to argue that the water rights were not relevant to the question of HOA jurisdiction. Judge Walton cut him off. "Mr. Fletcher, you are asking this court to uphold a property lien and a forced sale of water rights based on an amended plat that appears to be fraudulent. Do you have any evidence that the 2019 plat was legitimately filed?" Brian hesitated. "Your Honor, the document was accepted and recorded by the county. That creates a presumption of validity. A presumption that has been thoroughly rebutted by Mr. Zimmerman's evidence," Judge Walton said. "Do you have the original paperwork showing who requested the amendment and who actually notarized it?" "We are working to locate those records, Your Honor." "I see. So you want me to authorize the sale of water rights worth over $1 million based on a document that you cannot authenticate and that the alleged notary says she never signed? Judge Walton looked at Brian over her reading glasses. Is that correct, Mr. Fletcher? Brian's confidence was visibly deflating. Your Honor, the HOA board acted in good faith based on the county records. Good faith does not give you the right to tear up someone's property and steal their water, Judge Walton said. The emergency motion is granted. The water rights sale is blocked pending a full trial on the merits of Mr. Zimmerman's claims. Furthermore, I am ordering the HOA to remove all fencing and signage from Mr. Zimmerman's property within 48 hours and to cease any further action against his property pending resolution of this case. We will reconvene in 60 days for a full hearing. Sharon's face went white. She leaned forward to whisper urgently to Brian, who shook his head and gathered his papers. As we left the courtroom, Thomas was practically bouncing with satisfaction. That went even better than I hoped, he said. Walton is going to destroy them at the full hearing, and once the county attorney sees that ruling, they will have everything they need to pursue criminal charges. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders for the first time in 2 weeks. So what happens now? Now we go on offense, Thomas said. We file the civil suit for damages, we push the county attorney to act on the forgery, and we make it very clear to the HOA that they have picked a fight they cannot win. The civil suit was filed 3 days later, demanding $500,000 in compensatory damages for the destroyed irrigation system, punitive damages for the illegal seizure attempt, and legal fees. We also filed a L.I.'s pendants against the HOA's community center and office building, which meant they could not sell or borrow against those properties until the case was resolved. The HOA board called an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. I was not invited, of course, but Marcus went and recorded the whole thing on his phone. Sharon spent most of the meeting insisting that the HOA's lawyers had everything under control and that my claims were baseless, but you could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Several residents stood up to ask pointed questions about why the board had authorized such aggressive action without proper legal review. One woman, who identified herself as a real estate attorney, pointed out that the forged plat filing could expose every board member to personal liability. We relied on the advice of counsel, Sharon said defensively. Peterson and Associates assured us that we had legal authority. And where are those attorneys now? The real estate attorney asked. Why are they not here to explain this disaster? Sharon had no good answer for that. The meeting dissolved into chaos, with residents demanding answers and several board members openly questioning whether Sharon should resign. By the end of the night, 3 board members had quit, leaving Sharon scrambling to maintain a quorum. Meanwhile, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office had opened an investigation into the forged plat. An investigator named Lisa Morrison contacted me to go over the evidence Thomas had compiled. She was thorough and professional, asking detailed questions about the timeline and the documentation. When I mentioned that Judge Morrison, who had signed the original court order authorizing the HOA's action, also lived in Cottonwood Springs, her expression became very serious. We will be looking into that as well, she said. If Judge Morrison signed an order based on fraudulent documents without properly reviewing the evidence, that is a serious problem. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks, the county attorney's office announced that they were filing criminal charges against Sharon Pritchard and 2 other HOA board members, Karen Doyle and Richard Webb, for forgery, fraud, and theft by deception. The charges carried potential prison time of up to 5 years per count. Sharon's arrest made the local news. I watched the footage of her being led out of her house in handcuffs, looking shocked and diminished in her bathrobe and slippers. Part of me felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the look on her face when she'd been directing workers to tear up my property, and the sympathy evaporated. The arrest triggered a panic in Cottonwood Springs. Residents started receiving letters from Thomas's office informing them that their water access was dependent on easement rights that had been granted by the previous property owners, and those easements could potentially be revoked by the current aquifer owner. The letters carefully did not threaten to cut off water, but they made it very clear that I had the legal authority to do so if I chose. The HOA's remaining board members, desperate to avoid further legal catastrophe, reached out through their attorneys to propose a settlement. They offered to pay for all repairs to my irrigation system, drop all fines and liens against my property, and pay $150,000 in damages. In exchange, they wanted me to sign a new easement guaranteeing water access to Cottonwood Springs for 99 years. I told them to make it $300,000, and we would talk. They countered with $200,000. I countered with $275,000 plus a formal written apology signed by every current board member and published in the community newsletter. They agreed, but I was not done. The utility district, which had been planning to buy my water rights before Judge Walton blocked the sale, reached out separately. They were facing a serious problem. Cottonwood Springs was only the first phase of a planned expansion that would include 2 more subdivisions and a commercial district. Without secure access to the aquifer, the entire development plan was in jeopardy. They needed me to sign off on water rights, and they were willing to pay for the privilege. Thomas and I spent 3 weeks negotiating with the utility district. The final agreement gave them extraction rights for up to 500,000 gallons per day in exchange for $2.4 million up front, plus annual royalty payments based on actual usage. I retained ownership of the aquifer itself and the right to impose conservation measures if water levels dropped below sustainable thresholds. The utility district also agreed to fund the complete restoration of my irrigation system using state-of-the-art equipment, which came out to about $80,000 worth of new infrastructure. The criminal case against Sharon and the other board members moved through the courts over the next 6 months. Karen Doyle took a plea deal early, agreeing to testify against the others in exchange for probation and community service. Richard Webb tried to fight the charges, but eventually pleaded guilty to fraud and received a suspended sentence with 2 years of probation. Sharon held out the longest, insisting that she had been acting in good faith and had been misled by the HOA's attorneys. But the evidence was overwhelming. The investigators had found emails showing that Sharon had been aware that my property was not originally part of the HOA and had discussed creative solutions to bring it under HOA control with Karen and Richard. They had conspired with a paralegal at Peterson and Associates to create the fraudulent amended plat, using a fake notary stamp that Karen had purchased online. In the end, Sharon pleaded no contest to 1 count of forgery and 1 count of fraud. Judge Walton, who had been assigned to the criminal case as well, sentenced her to 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. She also ordered Sharon to pay $125,000 in restitution to cover my legal fees and other costs. The fallout for Peterson and Associates was severe. The State Bar of Arizona opened an investigation into the firm's practices after discovering that they had filed similar aggressive actions against property owners in 3 other HOA cases. 2 attorneys at the firm were suspended from practice, and the firm itself dissolved within a year. Judge Morrison, who had signed the initial court order without proper review, was censured by the Judicial Standards Commission and quietly retired rather than face further discipline. The county implemented new procedures requiring judges to personally review all HOA enforcement orders rather than relying on summary paperwork. As for me, I used part of the settlement money to complete the renovation of my property. The new irrigation system was a work of art, with smart controllers, moisture sensors, and drip lines efficient enough to cut my water usage by 40% while actually improving my crop yields. I'd started growing specialty vegetables and herbs for restaurants in Phoenix, and the business was doing well enough that I was able to quit my remote office job and farm full-time. Marcus and I became good friends after everything that happened. He had been appalled by the HOA's actions and had become something of a whistleblower, providing me with documents and recordings from board meetings that helped build the case against Sharon. He told me that the culture in Cottonwood Springs had changed significantly after the arrests. The new HOA board was much more conservative in their enforcement actions, and residents were more skeptical of aggressive rule enforcement. Sharon got out of jail after serving 12 months with good behavior. I saw her once at a grocery store in Mesa, several months after her release. She looked older and tired, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt instead of her usual designer clothes. We made eye contact across the produce section, and for a moment I thought she might say something. but she just looked away and hurried out of the store. I do not take any pleasure in what happened to her. The whole situation was a mess that never should have occurred in the first place. If Sharon and her board had done proper legal research before trying to seize my property, they would have discovered that they had no legitimate claim. If they had simply approached me as neighbors and discussed the water situation like reasonable people, we probably could have worked something out without lawyers and criminal charges. But that is not how HOA boards tend to think. They get intoxicated by their tiny amount of power, convinced that they are protecting property values and maintaining community standards. They forget that the people they are regulating are their neighbors, not subjects. And when they cross the line from enforcement into abuse, the consequences can be devastating. The utility district's payments have made me financially comfortable for the first time in my life. I am not rich, but I do not have to worry about unexpected expenses or whether I can afford to fix something when it breaks. The farm is profitable, and I genuinely enjoy the work. I have hired 2 part-time employees to help with harvesting and deliveries, both of them local kids who are interested in sustainable agriculture. The best part, though, is knowing that my property is secure. The settlement with the HOA includes an ironclad agreement that my land is permanently exempt from all HOA rules, fees, and regulations. I could paint my house bright purple with orange polka dots if I wanted to, and they could not say a word. Not that I plan to do that, but it is nice to have the option. I still get calls occasionally from property owners in other HOA communities who are dealing with similar aggressive enforcement actions. Thomas has made something of a specialty out of these cases now, and he has won several significant judgments against overreaching HOA boards. He keeps telling me I should write a book about my experience, but I'm not sure anyone would believe it if they had not lived through it. The reality is that HOAs exist in a strange legal gray area where private organizations wield quasi-governmental power over people's homes without the constitutional protections that would normally apply to government action. In theory, HOAs are supposed to be democratic organizations run by and for the benefit of homeowners. In practice, they are often controlled by a small group of busybodies who enjoy exercising authority over their neighbors. Arizona has relatively strong laws protecting property rights compared to some states, which is why I was able to fight back successfully. But in other states, Sharon might have gotten away with it. There are horror stories out there of people losing their homes to HOA, foreclosures over trivial violations, or unpaid fees that the homeowner never knew about. The system is broken, and it needs to be fixed, but that is a bigger fight than I am prepared to take on. I'm happy just tending my farm, selling vegetables to restaurants, and making sure my aquifer stays healthy for the long term. The water that flows beneath my land has been there for thousands of years, long before HOAs and subdivisions and property rights disputes. It will still be there long after all of us are gone. I am just the temporary steward, trying to make sure it is not damaged or depleted by short-sighted greed. Every morning, I walk the perimeter of my property and check the irrigation system. The new equipment hums quietly, precisely delivering water exactly where it is needed. In the distance, I can see the roofs of the Cottonwood Springs houses, all painted in approved neutral tones, all conforming to the architectural standards that Sharon fought so hard to enforce. My house is painted a cheerful red, which Harold chose back in the 1970s. It does not match anything in the neighborhood, and I get complaints about it sometimes from new residents who do not know the history. I always politely explain that my property is not part of the HOA and that I am grandfathered in under the original development agreement. Most people accept that and move on. A few get huffy about it, but I do not really care. The truth is, the water situation taught me something important about power and vulnerability. Sharon thought she had all the power because she controlled the HOA and could bring legal pressure to bear against me. What she did not realize was that she was completely dependent on a resource that I controlled. When she tried to take something that belonged to me, she discovered that I could take something that belonged to her. And in the end, the person who actually controls the essential resource will always win that fight. I do not want to be the kind of person who uses that power abusively. The easement I granted to the utility district is fair and sustainable. It allows Cottonwood Springs to continue growing without depleting the aquifer. The royalty payments give me a steady income without putting me in a position where I benefit from excessive water extraction. It is a balanced solution that works for everyone, but I will never forget what Sharon tried to do, and I will never let my guard down around the HOA again. I keep all my property documents in a fireproof safe, and I have backup copies stored digitally in 3 different locations. I maintain a good relationship with the county recorder's office and check my property records every few months to make sure no one has filed any suspicious amendments or liens. And I have Thomas on speed dial, just in case. The farm has become something of a local landmark over the past couple of years. I host farm-to-table dinners twice a month where local chefs prepare meals using vegetables I've grown. People drive out from Phoenix and Scottsdale to attend, and the events have become popular enough that I usually have a waiting list. It is good marketing for the farm, and it is also just genuinely fun. I like connecting people with where their food comes from. Marcus helps me host the dinners, acting as a combination maitre d' and farm tour guide. He tells the story of the HOA water wars to every new group, usually embellishing it a bit more each time. By his latest version, Sharon had hired armed mercenaries to seize my property, and I had fought them off with nothing but a garden hose and determination. I keep telling him to stick to the actual facts, but he insists the embellishments make for a better story. One evening, about 2 years after the settlement, a young couple attended one of the dinners. They introduced themselves as Tom and Jennifer Blake, and they had just bought a house in a new subdivision on the west side of the valley. Halfway through the meal, Jennifer worked up the courage to ask me for advice. "Our HOA is trying to fine us $500 because our mailbox is the wrong shade of black," she said. "We measured the paint color exactly to their specifications, but the compliance officer says it does not match. We do not know what to do." I asked a few questions about their HOA's procedures and bylaws. It sounded like a typical case of petty tyranny, the kind of thing that gives HOAs a bad reputation. I gave them Thomas's contact information and suggested they document everything in writing. "The key is to make them follow their own rules," I said. "HOAs have to follow proper procedures just like any other organization. If they are fining you without giving you proper notice or an opportunity to appeal, they are violating their own bylaws. An attorney can usually shut that down pretty quickly." Tom looked relieved. "Thank you. We were worried we had made a mistake buying in an HOA community." "You might have," I said honestly. "But you are not stuck. You have rights as a property owner, and you should not be afraid to assert them. Do not let anyone bully you into thinking that the HOA can do whatever they want." After they left, Marcus asked me if I ever regretted buying a property with so much baggage attached to it. I thought about it for a minute before answering. "Not even a little bit," I said. "This place has given me everything I needed. Good land, good water, and a good fight when I needed one. I would not trade it for anything." And I meant it. Despite everything that happened with Sharon and the HOA, I had never felt more at home anywhere than I did on my 12 acres in Cottonwood Springs. The land had history and character. It had been worked by 3 generations of Harold's family before me, and if I had anything to say about it, it would continue to be worked for generations to come. The aquifer beneath my feet represented more than just water rights or money or legal victory. It represented continuity and stewardship and the responsibility that comes with controlling something essential. Harold had understood that when he refused to sell out to the developers. He had known that some things are more valuable than money, and some fights are worth having even when they would be easier to avoid. I visit Harold's grave sometimes at the small cemetery outside of town where 4 generations of his family are buried. I bring him updates on the farm and tell him about the legal battles in the settlement. I like to think he would be proud of how things turned out. He had spent his whole life fighting to preserve his family's land and water rights. I had managed to win that fight in a way that secured both for the future. The last time I visited, I found fresh flowers on his grave. The card said they were from Marcus, which surprised me. Later, when I asked him about it, he shrugged and said Harold had been a good man who deserved to be remembered. "He stood up to them when nobody else would," Marcus said. "That takes courage. The least I can do is make sure his grave does not look forgotten." We have a good community here, despite the HOA drama. Most of the people in Cottonwood Springs are decent folks who just want to live their lives without hassle. They were not happy to learn what Sharon and her board had been doing in their name, and they made sure the new leadership understood that aggressive enforcement would not be tolerated. The new HOA president, a retired engineer named Bill Patterson, reached out to me about 6 months after taking over. He apologized formally for what had happened and asked if there was anything the HOA could do to make amends beyond the settlement we had already reached. I appreciated the gesture, even though I knew it was partly motivated by fear of what I could do to their water supply if I wanted to be vindictive. I told Bill that the best thing the HOA could do was focus on being actual neighbors instead of acting like a police force. He seemed to take that to heart. The HOA has since scaled back enforcement dramatically, focusing only on serious issues that genuinely affect property values or safety. They have not sent out a single fine for mailbox paint colors or lawn length violations since Bill took over. It is amazing how much better a community functions when people treat each other with basic respect and courtesy. The constant low-level conflict that had characterized Cottonwood Springs under Sharon's leadership evaporated almost overnight once the new board took a lighter touch. Property values have actually increased, contrary to the dire predictions that strict enforcement was necessary to protect investments. I still get the occasional dirty look from residents who think my red farmhouse is an eyesore in their carefully coordinated beige landscape. I do not care. My property is mine, and I will maintain it the way I see fit. That is what property ownership means, and if people do not like it, they should not have bought in a development that included grandfathered properties. The farm continues to grow and evolve. I have added a small greenhouse that allows me to extend the growing season for certain crops. I have also started keeping bees, which has improved pollination across the entire property and gives me excellent honey to sell at the farmer's market. The bees do not care about HOA regulations or property disputes. They just do their work, turning flowers into honey and making everything around them more productive. There is a lesson in that, I think. The best response to petty tyranny and bureaucratic overreach is not to fight fire with fire. It is to focus on doing good work, building something valuable, and making yourself indispensable. Sharon tried to take my water rights because she thought I was vulnerable and isolated. She discovered that I controlled something her entire community depended on. She should have been trying to build bridges instead of burning them. These days, when I think about the whole situation, I mostly feel grateful. Grateful that Harold had the foresight to preserve the water rights and keep meticulous records. Grateful that Thomas was willing to take my case and fight for what was right. Grateful that Judge Walton saw through the HOA's deception and ruled based on facts rather than bureaucratic convenience. And grateful that I had the resources and stubbornness to fight back instead of giving in. Not everyone in my situation would have been able to do that. If I had been financially stretched when this happened, I might not have been able to afford Thomas's retainer. If I had not had Harold's old records, I might not have been able to prove my water rights. If Sharon had been just a little bit smarter about how she went after me, she might have succeeded in her plan before I could mount an effective defense. The whole experience has made me much more aware of how vulnerable ordinary homeowners are to HOA abuse. These organizations wield enormous power over people's lives and property, and there are very few meaningful checks on that power. State legislatures need to reform HOA laws to provide better protections for homeowners, require more transparency in HOA operations, and create real consequences for board members who abuse their authority. But until that happens, the best defense is knowledge and vigilance. Know your rights. Read your HOA's bylaws and understand what they can and cannot do. Document everything, and do not be afraid to get legal help when you need it. The cost of fighting early is always less than the cost of fighting after the HOA has already taken action against you. I have shared this advice with dozens of homeowners over the past couple of years, and I have seen it make a real difference. Knowledge is power, especially when dealing with bureaucratic organizations that rely on intimidation and ignorance to get their way. When homeowners stand up for themselves and demand that HOAs follow proper procedures, the organizations usually back down rather than risk a legal battle they might lose. The sun is setting over my property as I finish my evening inspection of the irrigation system. Everything is running smoothly, the water flowing exactly where it needs to go. In the distance, the lights are coming on in Cottonwood Springs, hundreds of homes glowing against the darkening desert sky. All of them dependent on the water flowing beneath my feet, all of them connected to my property in ways their owners probably do not even think about. It is a responsibility I take seriously. The aquifer is not just mine. It is a shared resource that supports an entire community. I could be vindictive and make life difficult for everyone who lives in Cottonwood Springs, but that would not serve any purpose except making me feel powerful. And I have learned that real power does not come from hurting others. It comes from building something valuable and protecting it for the future. Harold understood that. It is why he fought so hard to preserve his family's land and water rights, even when it would have been easier and more profitable to sell out. It is why he warned me about the HOA and made sure I understood what I was taking on when I bought the property. He was not just selling me a farm, he was passing on a legacy and a responsibility. I hope I am proving worthy of that trust. The farm is thriving, the aquifer is healthy, and the community has water access that is secure and sustainable. Sharon tried to steal all of that for short-term gain and personal power. She failed, and she paid a heavy price for that failure. But the land and the water endured, just as they have endured for thousands of years before any of us were here. That is the thing about natural resources. They outlast all of our petty conflicts and power struggles. The aquifer does not care about HOA regulations or property disputes or criminal charges. It just exists, quietly flowing beneath the surface, supporting life wherever it goes. My job is to make sure it continues to do that for as long as possible. As I walk back to the house, I think about everything that has happened since that terrible Tuesday when I came home to find Sharon tearing up my irrigation system. The legal battles, the criminal charges, the settlements and negotiations. It all seems almost surreal now, like something that happened to someone else. But the scars are still visible. The places where the irrigation lines were ripped out, the section of fence that had to be rebuilt after the HOA installed their chain link monstrosity, the countless hours spent with lawyers and investigators and court officials. But there are also new things. The upgraded irrigation system that would not exist without the settlement money. The relationship with the utility district that provides steady income and security. The community of people who have reached out for help with their own HOA battles. The farm dinners and the bees and the growing business that gives me genuine satisfaction. Sharon tried to take something from me, and in fighting back, I gained so much more than she tried to steal. That is the irony of the whole situation. If she had never come after my property, I would have just continued using the aquifer for my own irrigation and never thought much about its larger value. Her aggression forced me to research my rights and discover that I owned something much more valuable than I had realized. In trying to crush me, she made me stronger. In trying to take my water, she gave me leverage over an entire community. In trying to use the legal system as a weapon, she ended up destroying herself with it. There is a certain poetic justice in that outcome, even if it came at a tremendous cost to everyone involved. The house is dark when I get back, so I flip on the lights and start making dinner. It is a simple meal, just vegetables from the farm and some grilled chicken, but it tastes better than anything I could buy in a restaurant. There's something satisfying about eating food you have grown yourself, knowing exactly where it came from and how it was raised. As I eat, I scroll through my phone and see that Marcus has sent me a photo from tonight's HOA meeting. It shows Bill Patterson presenting a plaque to one of the longtime residents for her community service. The inscription thanks her for promoting kindness and neighborly cooperation in Cottonwood Springs. It is a far cry from the confrontational meetings Sharon used to run, where every gathering felt like a tribunal designed to catch someone in violation of obscure rules. The change in culture has been remarkable. People seem happier, more relaxed. There are fewer complaints and conflicts. Property turnover has slowed, which usually indicates that residents are satisfied with their community. The HOA is functioning the way it was supposed to, as a service organization that maintains common areas and facilitates neighborly cooperation, rather than as a quasi-governmental authority constantly looking for violations to punish. It did not have to go the way it did, If Sharon had approached me as a neighbor instead of an adversary, we could have worked something out that benefited everyone. I would have been happy to negotiate reasonable water access terms if she had asked nicely and offered fair compensation. But she chose confrontation and deception instead, and that choice destroyed her life and cost her community hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and settlements. I hope other HOA board members learn from her example. Power without accountability leads to abuse. Abuse leads to resistance. And resistance, when backed by legitimate legal rights, can topple even the most entrenched bureaucratic authority. The lesson is simple. Treat people with respect, follow the rules, and understand that your authority has limits. My phone rings and I see it is Thomas calling. I answer and he gets right to the point. I have got another potential client, he says. HOA in Tucson is trying to foreclose on a guy because his grass is too long. They claim he owes $80,000 in fines. The amounts are obviously ridiculous, but he is panicking because they have already filed the foreclosure paperwork. Can you help him? I ask. Probably, but I wanted to check if you would be willing to talk to him. He is scared and overwhelmed, and I think hearing from someone who has been through it would help him understand that these fights are winnable. I agree to call the homeowner tomorrow. It has become a regular thing for me, talking to people who are dealing with HOA nightmares. I do not charge anything for my time. I just share my experience and offer encouragement. Sometimes that is all people need to find the courage to stand up for themselves. After I hang up with Thomas, I pour myself a glass of wine and step out onto the back porch. The desert night is cool and quiet, with stars visible overhead despite the light pollution from Phoenix 30 miles to the west. This is my favorite time of day, when the work is done, and I can just exist in this place without thinking about anything else. The aquifer is down there, deep beneath the surface, doing what it has done for millennia. Storing water, filtering it through layers of rock and sand, releasing it slowly where the pressure is right. It does not ask for recognition or reward. It just exists, essential and invisible, supporting life without expectation of gratitude. There is wisdom in that. The most important things in life are often the ones we do not think about until they are threatened. Clean water, safe homes, respectful communities, fair treatment under the law. We take them for granted until someone tries to take them away, and then we realize how precious they were all along. Sharon threatened my home and my livelihood because she had power and thought there would be no consequences. She learned otherwise. The legal system, for all its flaws, still protects property rights and punishes fraud. The people who lived in her community, for all their investment in HOA rules, still valued fairness over arbitrary enforcement. And the water she tried to steal was never really available to take, because it belonged to something larger than any individual or organization. I raise my glass in a silent toast to Harold, wherever he is. He fought to protect this land and these water rights for his entire life, and he passed that fight on to me. I won it in a way he never could have anticipated, using laws and systems that did not exist when his family first homesteaded here. But the principle was the same. This land and this water are worth fighting for, and people who respect them will always triumph over people who try to exploit them. The wine tastes good, and the night air feels perfect against my skin. Tomorrow I will wake up early and check the irrigation system again. I will harvest vegetables and deliver them to restaurants in Phoenix. I will probably talk to that homeowner in Tucson and try to help him understand his rights. I will do the work that needs doing, one day at a time, secure in the knowledge that my home and my water and my land are protected. Sharon is out there somewhere, trying to rebuild her life after spending a year in jail. I do not wish her ill. I hope she has learned something from the experience and will make better choices in the future. But I do not think about her much anymore. She was an obstacle I overcame, nothing more. The real story is not about Sharon or the HOA or even the legal battle. It is about this land, this water, and the responsibility that comes with stewarding something essential. Harold understood that. I understand it now too. And someday when I am ready to pass this property on to someone else, I will make sure they understand it as well. The water flows beneath me, eternal and indifferent to human drama. It will still be flowing long after I am gone, still supporting life, still connecting everything that depends on it in an invisible web of mutual dependence. That is the real power, not the temporary authority of an HOA board or the vindication of a legal victory. The water is power. Everything else is just theater. I finish my wine and head inside to bed. Tomorrow's another day on the farm, and there's always work to be done. But tonight, I am content. My property is secure, my water rights are protected, and the aquifer flows beneath me like a promise that some things endure no matter what storms pass over the surface. Sharon tried to steal that from me, and in the attempt, she lost everything. I defended it, and in the process, I gained more than I ever expected. That is justice, imperfect and expensive, but real nonetheless. And in a world where HOAs too often crush individual homeowners beneath bureaucratic tyranny, it is good to know that resistance is possible, and victory is achievable. The fight is over now, but the work continues. The land needs tending, the water needs stewarding, and the community needs reminding that fairness and respect matter more than rules and regulations. I am happy to do that work for as long as I am able. It is what Harold would have wanted. It is what the land deserves, and it is ultimately what makes this place worth fighting for in the first place.